I was born in 1929, which was the year of the crash. And it wasn't a very good time to be born because I grew up during the Depression years. And things were very tough in my family. And I had a very disrupted family. There was always arguments and fights, and I tried to escape the chaos that my family life was. And so basically I made my own place in the attic of our big Victorian house. And I kind of stayed by myself. But it also affected me socially. I wasn't able to relate very well with my peer group, with other guys. And when I went to school, I was picked on, and my teacher in the first grade said that I was different from the other kids and guys, and I knew that was true, that I just didn't fit in. And I never did fit in school. It was always really a difficult thing to go to school. I didn't want to go to school. It was a very bad experience for me growing up. Well, when I was 13, a Christian group came to town. It was called Sermons from Science, and the Moody Bible Institute put it on. And Erwin Moon was there with his Sermons from Science. And my uncle and I went to see this because he liked all kinds of scientific things. And it was fascinating, but that was the first time I ever heard the gospel message. I didn't know what a Christian was or who Jesus was or anything. But that night, I really met the Lord. And even though I didn't go forward that night, I felt something had happened in my heart. And so somehow I established a relationship with Christ when I was 13. Well, I told my piano teacher about this experience, and she was a very charismatic Christian way back in the 40s. And she explained everything to me about what a Christian was and all of this. And she was organist at a church. And I'd been studying piano for about 2 or 3 years by that time. And so I took an interest in the organ, and I started taking organ lessons at this church. Well, right about that time, my father died. And the pastor of this church was very kind and gentle and kind of took over my life. And I didn't know it at the time, but he was gay. He was married with 3 kids, but he was gay. And when I was, I guess maybe somewhere around 14 or 15, he asked me to come to his office one day. And he said, "Frank, you are a homosexual." And I had no idea what that word meant. I had never heard that word. I didn't know what it meant. So I said, "Pastor, I don't know what that means." And he said, "Well, it means that you love other men." And I thought, well, I don't know, I was attracted to all of the good-looking, athletic men in school, but I had never, thought about sex with them or anything like that. And my whole point was I did not want to be different. And my school teacher had told me I was different. My pastor's telling me that here I am, a special breed of person. But he told me that this was a very wonderful thing, that God had made me gay. And he continued on about Jesus and John having a relationship, and David and Jonathan and Ruth and Naomi, and that this was a special blessing from God to be homosexual. Well, my whole interest in life was to become normal and to relate and to be able to have a normal life. And it just wasn't good news to me. And I thought, well, you know, he might be right now, because I have been attracted to men. And I was not attracted to girls at all at this point. But my hope was that it was a phase, and that sooner or later that, you know, I would mature and be normal like everyone else. So it wasn't good news, and I wasn't at first going to accept what he told me. But as time went on, I had this sinking feeling that he was right, because I was attracted more and more to the guys at school. And I got pretty depressed about this whole idea. When I was 16, he picked out a man in the church to be my lover. And I rejected this. The man was 38, I was 16, and to me, he looked like a fat old man. He didn't look like, you know, somebody I would be interested in. So my pastor picked out a lover for me. And he told me that this gentleman had a lot of money, that he had a lovely home, I could go live with him, he would put me through college, and he would see that I was successful in business and life, and that I would have a very comfortable, wonderful life with this man. Well, about this time, I lived with my mother, and I had to take care of my mother. And the pastor had given me a job at the church as janitor, and that kept us going financially. So I knew I could not walk away from my mother at 16, and I also knew that she would, though something was up, you know, that she was not going to go for this, that suddenly I leave her and I go live with a 38-year-old man. I told my pastor, you know, this will not work. I cannot do this. My mother will never allow it, and it will cause a lot of problems. But he was really adamant, and he said, you know, if you don't do this, you know, our relationship is over. And I thought, well, that meant that he was going to fire me as janitor, and then I would be in trouble without an income. But I kind of stood my grounds, and I had seen Pastor in action with other boys, and he had asked, one day he had asked all of us boys to come into his office, and he wanted to inspect our genitals, and so he asked everybody to drop their pants, and he inspected them and said, well, some are normal and some are not normal, and so forth. So you know, I had a real problem with him, but my hope was that he was wrong, that I would grow out of it, that I would find some young lady and get married and put all this in the past. So I did not go live with this man, but he was extremely angry with me. He wouldn't talk to me, but he didn't fire me. And I think the reason was because I knew too much. About 18, I graduated from high school. I moved to San Francisco, and there was no one to talk to. You know, the only one I could talk to about homosexuality was my pastor. So even though he was angry with me for many reasons, but I had to see him. So I went back to see him. And surprisingly, he was very compassionate, very friendly, didn't hold anything against me. And he says, Frank, you know, for years now I've been telling you you're homosexual. And so that day I decided, I talked to God and I said, Lord, he's your man. You know, he represents you. He speaks what you tell him to, and I must be gay if he tells me this is what I am. So that was the beginning of my gay life at 19. And I found some gay bars, and we were off and running. I had 25 years of very active gay life in San Francisco. I had relationships one after another, and some very destructive. And I reached the age of 43, and the gay life had not worked for me. I had wanted a long-term relationship that would last, you know, for a lifetime. All I got was short-term people walking out on me, sometimes walking out on me with my wallet, and it just didn't work. It wasn't the beautiful, wonderful life the special life that God had given me at all, that the pastor had told me. So I was very successful, however. I was a businessman. I had several stores, and I had no money problems at all. Things were good. I had summer home and nice cars and various things. But none of these, you know, material things mattered to me. I was lonely and very, very depressed. And I was thinking about taking my life. I had stores in Marin County, stores in San Francisco, in Carmel, and I had to travel a lot. And so I was on the Golden Gate Bridge sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. And I thought, you know, one of these days I'm just going to stop mid-span and jump, because I've got everything I want materially, and it doesn't mean a thing to me. I don't have a relationship. So I was on the bridge one day, and I heard these words come in my mind. And it said, if you're willing to take your life, are you willing to give it to me? And I thought, what is that? Where did that come from? And I thought, you know, am I hearing things? Am I crazy? I don't know. Where did this come from? And so I was driving along, and I heard it again. If you're willing to take your life, are you willing to give it to me? And I thought, well, that must be God. You know? And I had known the Lord when I was young, but I had heard so many negative things in the church about homosexuality that none of the other churches thought it was so wonderful as my pastor did. And so I had left the church behind. I had just given up on the church. In fact, I was a little angry at the church, actually. So, but I had a good relationship with God when I was in my teenage years. So I was leaving my office, and I was coming down the corridor, and I heard God say, I want you back. And it scared the life out of me, because this time I really knew that this was God speaking to me. And I had a Christian young man working for me. So I looked him up, talked to him, and said, you know, God spoke to me. And he says, I want you back. And he says, I said, I don't know what that means. Well, he knew I was gay, but he wasn't gay. And so he led me in about a 20-minute sinner's prayer that included a lot of things I had never done, but I did agree, and if God had something for me, I wanted it, so I pretty much said yes to everything. And I thought, you know, my life is a complete disaster. It certainly couldn't be any worse with God. And so I thought, if the Lord wants me, he can have me. On Sunday, I went to church for the first time with this young man that was a Christian that worked for me. And I could see that there was gay people in the church. It was a hippie church, and this was 1973, right in the middle of the Jesus movement. And it was wild, and it scared me a little bit, but I thought, you know, whatever it is, I'll do it, you know. So after church, 3 young men came to visit me, and they were all gay. And they said, I heard you made a recommitment to Christ, that you're leaving the gay lifestyle, and we would like to leave it too. And so that kind of, you know, within 3 days, we had a little group going. But the thing was, none of us knew anything about why we were homosexual. 2 of the guys were married, but they were going off to the city to have sex with men. And one was single and had a lover. And so we decided that we would try to find out the cause of homosexuality, and together we would find the way out. For $300, I got a half hour on Christian radio, and I went on and pretty much mentioned 1 Corinthians 6, verse 11, that Paul knew homosexuals, that they had changed, that homosexuals could change, and that this idea that they were born to be lost was not scriptural. And a number of people had listened in that day, and at least 2 guys joined my group, and so it kind of put us on the map. And sooner or later, we were having a fairly large group. One of the members named it Love in Action, and Love in Action is still in ministry today, doing fine. 38 years now later, it's still going. In 1973, God raised me up to ministry. He raised up a man in South Africa, one in Los Angeles, one in Amsterdam. So we were all raised up in the same year by the Lord, so I wasn't the only one. We did feel that it was a move of God, that it was God's answer to the APA saying homosexuality is normal, and God is saying, not really. About 3 years into my ministry, I had a telephone call from a lady, Barbara Johnson, and she told me that her son had just went off into the gay lifestyle, and she was very depressed, and I talked to her for hours, and she was asking me, how could this happen, and why do people become gay? Well, in our conversation, Barbara mentioned that she had gone to her local ex-gay ministry, and that they didn't help parents, they only helped people who were struggling with homosexuality, so they couldn't help her. But and so she had gone from there to the Christian bookstore, and she had found our first book, which was called The Third Sex. And Kent Philpott, my pastor, had put it together, and I had helped him. And I had always felt that homosexuality was what we call father replacement search, that it was caused by a lack of affirmation from a significant male in your life in early age. When we started Exodus, the premise was that God could change you, that God could change you from gay to straight, basically. Although it's a long journey, it's a difficult journey. Some people don't make it all the way for a variety of reasons because of the difficulties. There's very little support. Most of the world believes that people are born homosexual and can't change. But we don't believe that at Exodus. We believe that there are reasons why people became homosexual, that they weren't born that way, but there were circumstances in life that directed them towards homosexuality. And even our personality sometimes. People will take advantage of that if we're shy or fearful or whatever, melancholy, whatever, that sometimes we get pushed into homosexuality. So we did not believe that homosexuality was inborn. We believe that there was conditions that created homosexuality, and that conditions could get us out of homosexuality. If we could find the answers to why we became homosexual, we'd also find the answers of how to get out of homosexuality. So Exodus was created with the idea that change is possible. And it wasn't a quick fix. It wasn't, as they say, pray the gay away. It was a long journey. God's intention was that we don't have to go it alone, that we are to be part of a fellowship, and that we're to be knit together, helping each other. And so the church is the answer. I know a lot of gay people have very negative feelings towards the church because of the rejection that they have received, and that many are very hostile towards the church. But that's where your healing will come from.